LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out about 24 of the weekend's best clips for you tonight, and as usual, they come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, what I like to call the corporate media here in the United States. And even though I don't have any of the political comedy clips this week from Saturday Night Live or Real Time with Bill Maher, I have found a few comic moments for you from last week on what's supposed to be the actual news. And also, I've listed the topics I'll be covering for the show down in the video description. If you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there that you can skip to the topics that interest you. Tonight's topics include the scandal with incoming Republican House Majority Whip Steve Scalise getting in trouble for a 2002 speech to this white supremacist KKK-linked group founded by David Duke, the ongoing battle over U.S. immigration policy, the end of U.S. combat operations in Afghanistan while America's endless war may continue, social media friendships of all things, splits in the Republican Party, and also the influenza epidemic. But first, I want to start with the continuing topic of the conflict between cops and their communities, especially communities of color. With the funeral of NYPD officer Wenjian Liu today, Fox News has been playing up the danger to police officers all week. Very supportive of the police officer version of events, and I think it actually went to the point of comedy in the middle of this tragic shooting in Pennsylvania last week that John Scott on Fox News is Happening Now reported last Wednesday like this.
Police shot and killed a man near Philadelphia after he tried to run them down in his car. He also posted a video online threatening to kill officers. They tried to arrest the suspect in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, ordering him out of his car at a blockade, but he was about to hit the gas, so 5 officers opened fire. Police officials say such videos are upsetting in today's environment.
Now, I'm not saying that the officers weren't threatened by this vehicle in that case. I don't really know the facts, but I'm just skeptical of this idea that he was about to hit the accelerator when he was shot by 5 officers. I don't know exactly how you can determine someone's about to hit the accelerator. That's why I thought that was kind of an incredible version and a very credulous reading of the facts by the Fox News anchor. And like I said, there's been this pattern on Fox News all week where they've been playing up the dangers to police officers and really taking police officer point of view. And that's not the only kind of divisiveness that's come out of this whole cop versus community and community of color conflict. And I want to show another little comic moment I thought was comic anyway, based on my knowledge of former Speaker of the House, Republican Newt Gingrich, who I guess is kind of a pundit. He did run for president back in 2012, but here he is attacking President Barack Obama for being divisive, using divisive language on this whole racial police incident or incidents. And so much so that even Bob Schieffer, who's not really the most skeptical of all the questioners on the Sunday morning programs, actually questions Newt Gingrich on, are you really blaming President Obama? And I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip here.
Second, there has to be some recognition, and this will probably get me in trouble. Young people should be told when a policeman tells you to stop, stop. There's a dual requirement here. You have the first African-American president, you have an African-American attorney general, and 6 years into their effort, we are in some ways further apart, not close together. That's a tragic failure of leadership at the very top. Yeah, the community has to respect the police, and the police have to respect the community. And both have failed.
Are you somehow saying that this is the fault of Barack Obama?
I'm saying that the president spends a lot of his time using language which is divisive, automatically jumps to conclusions about things he doesn't know. I'm saying the Attorney General clearly has given speeches that are divisive. And I'm just suggesting to you, just as a tragic lost opportunity, that you would think that 6 years into the first African-American president, there would be a sense in the community of us coming closer together. That hasn't happened. And let me just remind you, The two people who've done the most to save African American lives in New York City were Rudy Giuliani and Mike Bloomberg. Their policing techniques, led by Chief Bratton, who invented them, actually have saved thousands of lives by focusing on crime in a very intelligent way. And candidly, if Chicago were being as aggressive about it as New York, you'd be saving hundreds of African American lives a year in Chicago.
Let me
Now, that last point about the what's called broken windows policing policy being the reason for the drop in crime and the saving of all these lives, that is something I'm going to get to in just a minute. But what I found really amusing about that particular clip was Newt Gingrich accusing someone else of using divisive language when he's like the author of the memo that was sort of like the start of the modern era of divisive political language. I actually put a link down in the video description, and here I took a little screenshot of this memo called from 1996's the GoPack thing that Newt Gingrich ran, that was sort of like a teaching Republicans how to win in elections. And this is his memo, Language, a Key Mechanism of Control, where he lists all these like positive, nice words to apply to Republicans and these negative, nasty words that's what he wants people to call Democrats. So for him to be claiming that someone else is using divisive language, that was my other comedy clip. And then the sort of third bit of comedy I also want to take from CBS's Face the Nation. Bob Schieffer is pointing to this work stoppage as some sort of possible crisis in New York. The work stoppage of the NYPD. They have like stopped writing up all these tickets, and they're only going after like really dangerous criminals. And Bob Schieffer sort of assumes that that's a big problem in a question he asked to New York Senator Chuck Schumer, and Chuck Schumer doesn't really pick up on the weirdness of that whole argument, as I'll discuss after you see Bob Schieffer's question and Chuck Schumer's sort of dodge of an answer over in this clip.
all of it is this nasty situation that's developed between the mayor and the New York Police Department. We now understand that arrests are down 66%, traffic citations down 90%. Every category of arrests, the statistics show a dramatic drop. What is going on here, and is this reaching a crisis stage?
No, I don't think it is, Bob. Let me first say, today is a day to honor Officer Liu and his family and the men and women of the police department. Liu signified, the greatness of New York and America. Poor immigrant, came from China, worked really hard and very difficult jobs, volunteered. He was a volunteer police officer for 3 years before he became a police officer. And he, like the other police officers, do a great job making New York City the safest city of the large cities in the country. Now, as for the divide, I think New Yorkers agree. We need a very strong police department that continues to keep crime down, and we need good community-police relations. They've started to talk to one another, both sides. That's going to continue, and I don't think the chasm is unbridgeable. If they continue talking to one another, I believe we can solve this problem.
Now, I don't think that was the right chasm or divide that Senator Chuck Schumer was talking about there when confronted with these statistics about NYPD not writing all these like minor tickets. And I think that it's actually something that Matt Taibbi pointed out, not only in this book. I put a new book up here because I'm trying to finish up that video on the Sam Harris quote that I used to have that book there. This is Matt Taibbi's book, The Divide, American Injustice in the Age of the Wealth Gap. And he talks about the way I'm in the middle of reading that book. I'm not quite done with it. But the part I've gotten through, he's already talked about how in New York they have this broken windows policing system where they go after even the smallest infractions, and they even pick up all these people who are innocent or who basically just end up not having any charges. They're just kind of being harassed by the police in this big net to try to find drugs and guns, and most people don't even have drugs or guns, but they get taken into court and subjected to strip searching and having their face in the pavement. And anyway, Matt Taibbi wrote this article in Rolling Stone on December 31st. I've also put a link down to the whole article in the video description, it's titled "The NYPD's Work Stoppage is Surreal," and he talks about how this actually, since there isn't any chaos, there hasn't been this breakdown in society, even though the NYPD has stopped writing all these bogus citations. It really should be a moment to reflect on why it is that they've been doing that all this time. And so I wanted to point that out. And then I want to take one more clip from Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation. This is his interview with Democratic Representative Elijah Cummings, where he again sort of takes a pro-police attitude, I guess, at least a little bit, where he talks about the danger to police officers, which, I mean, there are dangers to police officers, but it's not really the most dangerous of professions. I think fishermen is the most dangerous of professions, but you don't see, a whole bunch of fishermen going out there and choking fish to death. Well, I guess they do choke the fish to death just by taking them out of the water. But anyway, here's Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation asking Elijah Cummings about the danger to police officers, and instead getting sort of a three-part program to bring some change to what's happening in American police departments over in this clip.
And exactly what you're saying, but the fact is, police put their lives on the line.
That's
every
right.
Single
Bob.
How do you combine an appreciation of that with getting to the root of what you see and what I see as some very real
Bob,
problems?
no doubt about it. They have a dangerous job. I have policemen in my family, and there's little room for error. But I think what we have to make folks realize is that we police realize it's not an us against them. And the community must realize it's not a us against them. It's us working together. And so trust has to be established. And there are three things that we've really got to do. We've got to look at tracking, first of all, to see how pervasive these problems are. Training to make sure that police are properly trained to address issues, and there may be issues where excessive force should not be used. And then we got to have accountability. All three of those things are so important. But the police have to understand that they need the community, and the community needs them. I practiced law for years, criminal law for years. I can tell you, Bob, you're not going to solve crime without the cooperation of the community. And so we've got to show that it's a win-win situation. I say police and community, it's not about moving to common ground. We're beyond that. We've got to move to higher ground, because this has got to be a win-win for everybody.
And on the subject of taking the higher ground, or the higher road, I guess, I wanted to show a couple quick clips on this ongoing controversy about NYPD officers turning their back on their mayor, Bill de Blasio. They did that at the funeral that was last weekend of Officer Ramos, who was killed by this sort of deranged guy who said that he was trying to avenge the death of Eric Garner and Michael Brown, but he also seemed to have some mental problems. And so I want to show two quick clips from CNN State of the Union. Their later broadcast actually covered the funeral and the ceremony after the funeral. And first, here's their reporter, Miguel Marquez, talking about the issue of police officers turning their backs on Mayor de Blasio in the
of Asian officers just outside the church here. We believe that the coffin of Officer Liu will be coming out soon. An NYPD officer came up and did ask whether or not we would be broadcasting live or speaking during that time. That's something that they really want to keep a very somber event here to honor this police officer as his casket moves toward its final resting place. With regard to police officers turning their back, here in front of the funeral home, there were no police officers who turned their back. Just down from here on the processional route where the casket will go, there were some police officers who did turn their backs, according to our Sarah Ganem, who's down there, and other producers who saw some of them. But a much smaller number than last week. The police commissioner, Bill Bratton, asking by memo to his police force that that was not an appropriate thing to do, that this was a time for grieving, not grievance, and that when they turned their backs on the mayor during Officer Ramos's funeral last week, that they didn't do any service to the valor and the sacrifice for both his life and his job in doing so. So he's asked them not to do it now. You can see now the police officers lining up here.
So that was CNN reporter Miguel Marquez talking about the context of which officers were turning their backs on the mayor, and he referred to their reporter Sara Ganim, and they actually then went to Sara Ganim later in the program, and she also gave some more background on the back turning and how it was much more reduced in the funeral this week over in this clip.
Funeral yesterday at the wake, and I heard many officers, some of them former NYPD who now work in other departments in other states, who had come back for this, say, look, you know, this is a political issue and it's also a very personal issue for many of these officers, but this funeral is not the place for that. And I think that that comes from this feeling that last week at Officer Ramos's funeral, the pictures, the photographs of the NYPD turning their backs on the mayor, those were incredibly powerful pictures, and they really changed the narrative of that day away from the funeral, away from a celebration of his life, and towards a more political issue. And people did not want to see that happen again today, Dana.
And Sarah, I've been in those situations. I'm sure it's hard to physically move around, but have you had a chance to talk to any of the officers who defied Commissioner Bratton and turned their backs nonetheless?
I haven't, but I have to say, Dana, from where I am, it wasn't a whole lot of them. It certainly wasn't the numbers that we saw last week. In a crowd of about maybe 450, where I can see just, you know, where my eyes can see and count from where I'm standing, maybe 50 of them, maybe even a little bit less. And then some of them were not NYPD at all. They were officers from other jurisdictions who, you know, wanted to make the point that they stand alongside the NYPD on this issue, but it wasn't a majority. It certainly was not even half. It was a few. And, you know, their commissioner, William Bratton, he said when he made this plea for them not to do this today, he said, look, this isn't a mandate. I'm not going to discipline anyone over it. It was just asking that this day not become about this conversation that we're having right now, that it become, that the narrative stay with Officer Liu, with his family, with the NYPD. And like I mentioned before, when I talked to officers who came in from out of town, I did get the feeling that one of the reasons that they wanted to come was because they wanted to show that solidarity. They wanted to show that they do still feel the support of the nation. And so while this is a very personal issue, a lot of them felt that it wasn't an issue for today.
So yeah, that was the second edition of State of the Union, hosted by Dana Bash, at least for the, or is it Dana Bash, who's filled in for Candy Crowley, because Candy Crowley gave her last broadcast of State of the Union a couple weeks ago. I don't know who's going to be the permanent host, but since that's the latest live show, they had coverage of the funeral, and they covered the issue of whether the officers turned their back, which seems like not the most reasonable course of action for a police department to take in this kind of situation. At least that's my opinion. I've been reading your opinions down in the comments section, so thank you for the people who are watching this as a live broadcast for letting me know what you think of the clips along the way. And I want to move on to the next topic now. So this is kind of a related topic. It's or at least I think it's related. I talked about the racism in the criminal justice system. Another place where racism came up in the news this last week was the incoming House Majority Whip, Republican Steve Scalise from Louisiana, got into some trouble when it came out that back in 2002, he talked to this group founded by David Duke, this white supremacist group in Louisiana, also kind of connected to the KKK. And I'm going to show a few clips on this topic. First, from NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd gave an introduction where he sort of covered all of it, and he showed clips both from Steve Scalise and then from this Democratic congressperson from Louisiana, who's an African American and actually ended up supporting Steve Scalise, and I'll talk about that a little more if you see that clip over here.
Just as the Republicans were ready to take on the president, they have to deal with an internal problem. A potential scandal involving one of their leaders, Steve Scalise, and a white supremacist group.
I haven't used the veto pen very often since I've been in office. Now I suspect there are going to be some times where I've got to pull that pen out.
Just as President Obama is challenging Republican leaders to, quote, prove they can govern, they are scrambling to contain the fallout from the revelation that a top House Republican leader spoke to a white supremacist group back in 2002. On Tuesday, the new majority whip, Steve Scalise, called the speech to the European American Unity and Rights Organization, leaked to a blogger by a former opponent, a mistake I regret.
I'm not familiar with who that group was, but from what I've seen about them, they don't represent the values that I represent. I detest hate groups of any kind.
The group was founded by former Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke. Earlier this week, Duke's longtime political advisor denied Scalise spoke to the group. Duke, though, says he may have. Either way, Republican leaders are standing behind Scalise. Speaker John Boehner calls him, quote, a man of high integrity and good character, saying, more than a decade ago, Representative Scalise made an error in judgment. And most importantly, Democratic Congressman Cedric Richmond, the only African-American member of the Louisiana delegation, is defending Scalise.
I don't view Steve as having racial challenges at all. I think that he's just a hard-working public servant that will go talk to anybody at any time, whether he agrees with their social beliefs or not.
Some conservatives, particularly the anti-Boehner voices, are skeptical of how this has been handled and see a double standard, believing if Scalise were a real Tea Partier, he wouldn't be in his job. Red State's Eric Erickson, how the hell does somebody show up at a David Duke organized event in 2002 and claim ignorance? Radio host Mark Levin, if Scalise was a Tea Party member of Congress serving in leadership, Boehner and his media cheerleaders would have forced his resignation by now. Fox News host Sean Hannity is renewing his call for Boehner to step down. In 2002, incoming Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott was forced to resign his leadership post when at Strom Thurmond's 100th birthday, he praised the South Carolina senator who ran for president in 1948 on a segregationist platform.
We voted for him. We're proud of it. And if the rest of the country had followed our lead, we wouldn't have had all these problems over all these years either.
Now Republicans have to prove they can govern. Already, both parties in Washington use their weekend video addresses to tee up the same old political fight.
Everyone is beginning to realize what millions of you already know. The Affordable Care Act is working.
One problem with the health care law, one of many, is that because of its costs and mandates, small businesses face higher costs and have to hold off on hiring.
So will Washington work in 2015? I'm joined by Republicans.
So I thought that was a pretty good report from NBC's Meet the Press there, Chuck Todd, drawing the analogy to what happened to Trent Lott, especially because I think, I don't know which month in 2002 that Steve Scalise made this speech, but Trent Lott, his problem was also, that was December 2002, so it was probably within just a few months of each other that they both did the, I mean, what Steve Scalise did was, I mean, much more questionable than, I mean, Trent Lott, if you listen to what he said, he was really just trying to say nice things about this old racist. It's almost like, I don't know, it's like when you have racism in your family, that doesn't make you racist, or I don't know, maybe it does, but it seemed like what Trent Lott did wasn't as bad as what Steve Scalise did, and Trent Lott had to go, but I guess that was like real time, and this is 12 years later. So Steve Scalise doesn't seem to be in much trouble, although I thought it was interesting that he's getting attacked from the right, or at least the right is attacking the establishment for not being tougher on him, you know, that whole Tea Party thing. I also thought it was interesting that the one African-American Democrat in the Louisiana delegation, that Representative Cedric Richmond, came out in support of Steve Scalise. I wonder if there's some sort of quid pro quo. I don't know. Maybe I'm too cynical, but it seems like that shouldn't happen unless there's some sort of weird quid pro quo going on, especially because the Republicans have so much power in the House of Representatives that they could really give out some sort of favor to a minority in more ways than one congressperson from Louisiana, like Representative Cedric Richmond. But I also noticed not just that one Democrat, that all the Republicans who I saw on the shows, I'm going to show a few examples here, supported Steve Scalise. There was no one really calling for him to step down, including the African-American Republican from Utah, which that seems like she's out of place in a couple different ways, Mia Love is her name, and she was just elected in the November elections. She's about to be sworn in. I guess she's actually a congressperson-elect, and she was asked about what Steve Scalise had done over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos talking to Martha Raddatz over in this clip.
Love, I want to turn to you on this. I'm sure you've been following the story involving one of your House leaders this week, Steve Scalise, who spoke to a white supremacist group in 2002. What were your first thoughts?
My first thoughts is, this was 12 years ago. It's interesting that it's coming up now. I found that really interesting. These groups are awful, and the last thing I want to do is give them any sort of publicity or credibility. And I can say, as far as I'm concerned, with Representative Scalise, he has been absolutely wonderful to work with. He's been very helpful for me, and he has had the support of his colleagues.
Does it hurt the image of the Republican Party, and should he remain in leadership?
I believe he should remain in leadership. There's one quality that he has that I think is very important in leadership, and that's humility. And he's actually shown that in this case, and has apologized. And I think that we need to move on and get the work of the American people done.
I'm not sure what you meant by humility. I mean, he has claimed ignorance in a way that doesn't really make a lot of sense. He claims that he didn't really know the nature of this group, but I mean, David Duke was a pretty famous guy in 2002. And I think at one point he also said that Google didn't exist in 2002 when Google was like the #1 search engine in 2002. He said, it's not like back then I could have Googled it, but he actually could have Googled it. And I want to show one more Republican who was also standing up for Steve Scalise. This is over on Fox News Sunday. This is another congressperson-elect, Lee Zeldin, and apparently he is going to be the only Republican Jew in Congress since Eric Cantor was primaried, and Chris Wallace brought that up when asking him if since he's the only Republican Jew, if he had any particular problem with, David Duke and the KKK being somehow connected to his incoming Republican majority whip over in this clip.
Zeldin, you are now the only Jewish Republican member in the House, with Eric Cantor having been defeated. Are you concerned by the reports that came out this past week about the House Majority Whip, Steve Scalise, that a dozen years ago he spoke to a group that was founded by former Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke?
Well, it's important, as you just mentioned, it was a dozen years ago, and the speech was not about some of what's been reported. The speech is about making the state government, where he was serving at the time, more efficient, to reduce wasteful spending. It's unfortunate that so many news reports don't even mention the fact that this was a dozen years ago, and don't mention the fact that this was about a very specific issue to reduce wasteful spending. I think that there are many in the mainstream media who look for any opportunity to try to tear down Republicans, to help back up the President of the United States and the Democrats in Congress. The fact of the matter is there's been so much progress. We saw it with the election of Mia Love, of Elise Stefanik, the youngest woman ever to be elected to Congress.
Mia Love, an African-American woman in Utah.
That's right, and Carlos Curbelo down in Florida, who's a Hispanic. And the list goes on of women and minorities elected. There is progress that is undeniable. It'll continue through the 2016 elections. I think the media is just trying to get a head start tearing down the Republican Party.
Well,
yeah, I don't know about Representative-elect Lee Zeldin there. His response attacking the media. I don't know if really the media is to blame for Steve Scalise's problem. I do kind of wonder who it is who got that story to the media 12 years after the fact, right when he was becoming the Republican majority whip. That seems a little suspicious to me. And although I also think it's a little weird that the only Jewish Republican in Congress felt the need to attack the media. I mean, he didn't say the Jewish-controlled media, I suppose, but does he have to like differentiate himself from the media because there's so many Jews in the media or something? I don't know what. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but the last clip I want to show on this topic is a Democrat responding to the Steve Scalise scandal with the David Duke KKK group, and she actually made an interesting suggestion, I thought, over she's on ABC's This Week, is it? No, this is NBC's Meet the Press, excuse me, where she responded to the issue by saying, you know, it's all well and good to apologize and say, you know, you didn't mean to do anything racist, but what about actually supporting those policies that show that you're not racist? And I'll talk about that a little more if you see that clip here.
I think that is something that the Republican leadership is going to have to decide and live with the consequences. It was clearly an inappropriate place to be. This is a Ku Klux Klan leader, David Duke. But what I'm more interested in, when this kind of thing happens, people disown it. They say this was wrong. But what do they do about it? What are the actions? I'll give you a few. The Republicans can move along on Loretta Lynch fast. She's a U.S. attorney, the nominee for Attorney General. She's been vetted before. Get it done in a month. The Justice Department runs the civil rights enforcement in this country. Get the voting rights bill done. There's Republicans, 10 Republicans in the House on it last year, Sensenbrenner leading it. Get that done. That's action, not just words, and get immigration reform done. To me, that is what you do when you've got a major problem like this. You say you disown it. You say you want to move on civil rights, then do it.
So I actually thought that was a pretty good response in an argumentative sense, like putting it on the Republicans to, you know, walk the walk instead of just talking the talk when you're accused of racism. And the issues she brought up, the confirmation of Loretta Lynch, the Voting Rights Act, and also immigration, I thought was especially interesting. And the other senator she was on with there was John Barrasso, and Chuck Todd brought her answer over to him, and the immigration issue actually came up in terms of the confirmation of Loretta Lynch to be Attorney General, because John Barrasso apparently is a strong believer in what Obama's executive action on immigration being unconstitutional. And I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip over here.
Is that a proper response? I think we need to get the new senators sworn into office, move in specifically with regard to Loretta Lynch, and I've met with her. We had a very cordial meeting. The issue there is the president's illegal action on executive but is she qualified amnesty. Is she qualified to be Attorney General? Well, that's going to come up in the questioning what she views with the president's actions on amnesty. Is it legal? Is it not legal? Is she going to be the people's attorney? Is she going to be a presidential protector? And that's going to be a big part of this. These hearings are going to be very consequential. And very much focused on immigration. Well, that's certainly going to be a part of it because of the president's actions, which I believe have been illegal. What's the first bill that's going
Now, you notice John Barrasso kind of dodged what Amy Klobuchar was talking about by going into this whole immigration action being illegal, and that's actually bogus. I've shown this page before, but there's this National Immigration Law Center page, and I put a link down in the video description again that gives you an outline of why the president has really broad authority to grant deferred deportations. And it's not just because he has prosecutorial discretion as the chief executive of the federal government, but it's also because the immigration laws passed by Congress give the executive branch a lot of authority to fill in the blanks. That's the way the laws have been specifically written by previous Congresses. So Congress has no one but itself to blame for the fact that President Obama has this broad executive discretion, just like previous presidents. I pointed out on previous Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundups that George H.W. Bush gave amnesty, if that's what you want to call it, to just about the same percentage of undocumented immigrants who are in the country after Reagan's path to citizenship. Really, there was a path to citizenship in the comprehensive immigration reform in the Reagan administration. And to fill in some of the gaps there, George H.W. Bush did an executive action that was very similar to what Obama did, and no one called it unconstitutional or illegal then. But I'm going to show you multiple Republicans, I think three Republicans in a row, set up what seems to be a showdown they're going to have with Obama in January or February over this issue, and they're going to make a big deal out of the fact that it's unconstitutional when it's clearly constitutional, at least in my opinion as a licensed attorney, and based on those links that I just shared with you. But here, first of all, this is from Fox News Sunday. John Thune, another senator, Republican, and he's answering a question from Chris Wallace on if he's going to promise to keep funding the Department of Homeland Security, because when they made their deal at the end of the year to fund the government for an entire year, the one department they didn't fund for an entire year is Department of Homeland Security, so they can have this fight over immigration. And John Thune said, they say power the purse a couple times, which really means they are threatening to shut down the government. And I'll talk about that a little more if you see that clip here.
That is immigration. The Republican Congress, has only funded the Department of Homeland Security till the end of February, while you try to find some way to undo his executive action deferring deportations for up to 5 million people in this country illegally. A couple of questions. Can you promise that the Republican Congress will not shut down funding for the department that protects our homeland? And how will Senate Republicans handle someone like Ted Cruz, who may take a harder line and in the past has been willing to stand on principle and shut down the government over that?
Right, and we're not going to shut the government down, Chris, but I do think that
including the Department of Homeland Security?
Well, including that funding bill expires at the end of February. We recognize it's important that we fund the government. Now that we're in the majority, we have the responsibility to do that. But we're also going to use the power of the purse, which is what the Constitution gives the Congress, as a mechanism by which to challenge the president on issues where we think he's overstepped his authority. And what he did on immigration is clearly an example of that. He said on 22 different occasions that he didn't have the legal or the constitutional authority to do this, and he did it anyway. That needs to be challenged. We will look for every opportunity to do that, but it's also going to be important for us to recognize that as a majority in the House and the Senate, we now have the responsibility to get things done for the country and to make sure that our government is funded, but funded in a way that's consistent with what I think the American people said in the November election, and that is they want the Congress more involved in these issues and not have the president overreaching consistently as he has now in the past with executive power.
So even though Senator John Thune said there that he doesn't want to shut down the government, he did mention the power of the purse, and you can hear some of those same talking points later on Fox News Sunday, where Representative-elect Zeldin, the only Republican Jew in Congress, as you recall, was asked basically the same question, and he seemed ready to stand on principle and defund at least some of the government over in this clip.
A little more detail in a moment. Congressman Zeldin, you say that President Obama's decision to his executive action on immigration to defer deportations is unconstitutional, but you also say that we shouldn't shut down the government. Where do you put yourself on the spectrum between, on the one hand, Ted Cruz and the Tea Party, let's stand up and confront the president, stand on principle, even if it means things like shutting down the government, and on the other hand, the establishment leaders like Speaker Boehner, who are saying, let's look for compromise?
Well, the president's action is unconstitutional. I have a lot of respect for the office of President of the United States. He is not also Congress in many ways. It seems like he thinks that he is a monarch. Over the course of our nation's history, we've always been sensitive to presidents who view the executive branch in that fashion. I think that it's very important going forward as we move into January, February, whether it's through legislation or the funding of part of the budget at the end of February, that we use the power of the purse, that Congress uses this message sent in November.
But
this
just
expanded
to short
majority.
circuit this, are you saying that you would let funding for the Department of Homeland Security, which runs out at the end of February, run out to make a point to the president about immigration?
Well, all options need to be on the table, and we need to utilize the power of the purse. And if we show no willingness at all to use that power to our advantage, that leverage is immediately off of the table.
All right.
So, yeah, it sounds like that Republican Congressperson-elect, Zeldin, is much more willing to say that he's going to shut down the Department of Homeland Security or try to defund it. Although the way they do that isn't very clear to me, because a lot of the stuff they're doing is self-funding, paid for by fees, and I don't know how you defund someone, an immigration officer not deporting someone. That's kind of hard to defund as well. And the reason I think they may be doing this, though, is because this gives them a talking point, something to stand on, the unconstitutionality and illegality of President Obama's action as sort of their excuse for not really doing anything. And I guess someone in the Republican Party has decided that that's going to work. And I think the reason is because they are not willing to do comprehensive immigration reform that includes a pathway to citizenship, which is the most important, aspect for people who care about, not tearing apart families and all of that, that I've talked about so many times on my Sunday clip roundup. And I want to show another congressperson-elect, another Republican from Fox News Sunday. I noticed Fox News Sunday had 4 politicians on, and surprise, surprise, they were all Republicans. I guess Fox News doesn't need any Democrats in 2015 so far. Maybe next week they'll have some Democrats on. But this last one. This is a Republican congressperson-elect. Her name, it's McSally is her last name. Let me look at Martha McSally, and she is asked about border security and a pathway to citizenship, and she really seems only willing to talk about border security, and she talks about the roots of the problem being border security, or that part I'm not quite sure. She gets me a little confused with the talking points here.
Congresswoman McSally, as we said, you served from Arizona. You represent a district in Tucson. Obviously, immigration a big issue there. In the wake of President Obama's executive order, how do you think Republicans should handle the immigration issue? Should it be all about tougher enforcement, or should there be an effort to find some path towards legalization?
I think we need to address the root causes and do first things first. And in my district, it includes border security as a main focus. So we've got to secure our border. We've got transnational criminal organizations that are trafficking drugs and people, weapons, and money in and out of our neighborhoods. We need intelligence-based operations and a better strategy to address this issue, because it is a public safety threat and a national security threat. And the people that I'm talking to in my district, they want to revamp and modernize the legal immigration system so that if somebody wants to come here to work, or they graduate from the University of Arizona with a PhD, they don't go back to one of our competitors. We actually give them an opportunity to come here, work, pay taxes on all ends of that spectrum. And so my district is looking for common sense solutions to address root causes. These political maneuvering by the Obama administration is addressing some of the hotbed issues that are really more symptoms. And we need bipartisan solutions to address some of those, but we've got to focus on the root causes, which is border security and modernizing the legal immigration system so it's responsive to our economic needs.
Congressman.
That sounded like a bunch of talking points more than any rational policy, and it seems like that kind of dovetails with the other Republicans who were talking about the power of the purse and standing on principle and fighting Obama's unconstitutional action, because I guess if they concentrate on that, they don't have to concentrate on their lack of real comprehensive immigration reform that deals with the problems of the millions of undocumented immigrants who are here already. But anyway, those are all the clips I want to show on immigration. I don't know if that's an important issue to any of the people who are watching, but you can let me know what you think down in the comments section. So another big thing that happened in the last week was the supposed end of U.S. combat operations in Afghanistan. and that was covered on a couple of the shows, Meet the Press and on NBC, and this week with George Stephanopoulos on ABC, and they did it in very different ways. First, I want to show a couple clips from the NBC coverage. First, this long story about the end of the conflict, or the end of combat operations in Afghanistan, but saying multiple times that, and this was also in the intro to Meet the Press, where they talked about America being in an endless war, which isn't something you see talked about a lot on the corporate media, where a lot of their sponsors are the suppliers of the hardware for the endless war. But they did talk about it sort of at length over on NBC's Meet the Press, with Chuck Todd handing over to Richard Engel to give this extended report on the end of the conflict in or combat operations in Afghanistan, but the ongoing endless war over in this clip.
Technically, U.S. combat operations did formally come to a close in Afghanistan in 2014. However, here are the facts. There are still going to be 11,000 American soldiers remaining in the country, just as chaos is beginning thanks to a resurgent Taliban. And there will soon be 3,000 American troops in Iraq, where the situation there is, if anything, bleaker, thanks to ISIS slaughtering thousands and controlling large swaths of that country, as well as Syria. So we asked our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, to take a look at what appear to be wars now without an end.
ISIS now has a new kind of brutal propaganda tool. The group is asking for tips online on how it should murder a Jordanian pilot it captured in Syria last month, the first coalition pilot to be taken captive. Suggestions have been tragically pouring in, including impalement and burning him alive. ISIS hardly seems deterred by the U.S.-led war against it, now in its 7th month. 2014 was the year when old wounds and old wars in the Middle East many Americans hoped were over returned to center stage. Syria imploded, allowing ISIS to explode onto the scene. And Iraq, well, the U.S. is now back at war there with around 3,000 troops on an increasingly dangerous training mission.
The Iraqi army came apart. 25% of it ran off and left their equipment. But it's hard to imagine a modest training mission being the key to gluing Iraq back together. I think it's come apart, and it will now have to settle along new geopolitical grounds.
The war in Afghanistan won't go away either. Last month, the president, in a very understated ceremony, announced the end of the combat mission there after 13 years. America's longest war ended with the faintest of whimpers.
We've been in continuous war now for almost 13 years, over 13 years, and next week we will be ending our combat mission in Afghanistan.
But the war isn't really ending, and military families will still have to keep giving. Around 10,000 U.S. troops will remain in Afghanistan to support local security forces. The mission's success is far from certain.
It's hard to imagine the Afghan army and police pulling together these disparate factions. So I think bad news in Afghanistan is what we ought to expect.
For the U.S. military, 2015 will focus on preventing old wars from getting even worse, which means those conflicts will continue to be a drain on American resources and perhaps a distraction from what could be the real security challenges, like Iran's nuclear program or cyber warfare. The U.S. now seems to be in a semi-permanent state of war, unable to break from the past. For Meet the Press, I'm Richard Engel.
So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool to have someone on the corporate media talk about America being trapped in an endless war, and they not only said that a couple times in the report, and like I said, it was in the intro to Meet the Press this morning, they also had on a couple guests to talk about why there had been this failure, including this retired general who wrote this book, General Daniel Bolger, who wrote a book, Why We Lost, about why we lost the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is also not something you hear people say a lot in the media, although I would like to point out, I put a link down in the video description to a video I made back in 2009 called Who Lost Afghanistan, where I was already talking back then about how we had lost that war, and it was not really, that was right when Obama was coming into office, when Obama ordered this surge of troops into Afghanistan, when I thought the war was already lost based on a lot of mistakes that were made back in the Bush administration, basically not on the military side, but on the governance side. And I actually had this NPR interview quoting this person from an NGO who was like helping out the humanitarian needs of the people in Afghanistan, named Sara Chayes, and she was one of the guests on NBC's Meet the Press, along with that retired general who wrote the book Why We Lost, and they both talked about why the military aspect isn't as important as putting together good governance. And you can find a link down to the entire episode of Meet the Press where they talked about it a couple more times than in the clip I'm about to show. This is sort of where they put it all together at the end. This is both an answer from retired General Daniel Bolger, and then also activist or journalist turned activist, or activist turned journalist, I can't remember, Sara Chayes, over in this clip.
You, in your op-ed in the New York Times, said there needs to be an accounting of why we lost these wars. A 9/11 style commission that needs to be outside the military. And there's, of course, a cover story in the Atlantic Monthly I know you're very familiar with. Why do the best soldiers in the world keep losing? The tragic decline of the American military by, of course, Jim Fallows. I know you know this report very well. Is he right, by the way? Why do we have this incredible military that can't win these wars? What is your explanation for it?
I think Jim Fallows, unfortunately, is right on target. And I think the reality is the U.S. military is all about winning battles, but wars are an act of the entire country. And one of the challenges that we have, one of the reasons an accounting of these wars, as the president said, that we fought for more than 13 and a half years, is in order. We have to determine what we're doing wrong that's preventing us from winning. In a military sense, Chuck, I could tell you, and Sarah referenced it when she said it, the military can give you a quick victory over a conventional army. It cannot deliver a rebuilt country in the place you go. That takes an effort of the entire U.S. population and government, and moreover, it takes the commitment of the American people for the long term. That's what Jim Fallows is getting at.
You know, Sarah, so what is going to be the solution next? We're just going to manage this, and then what? At what point do we walk away, or do we now just never walk away?
It becomes difficult to walk away because these situations are spinning quite badly out of control, and it's spreading. I mean, there is a theme in these conflicts that also crosses a number of other really serious security situations, which is acutely bad governance or even kleptocracy. You look at the Arab Spring, look at Nigeria, look at Central Asia, and these issues are not really being dealt with. They're being sort of relegated as we keep playing catch-up with sort of stopgap military approaches. And so it seems to me that if there really is going to be a way to address these issues, it's got to be the civilian components of U.S. government that really step up to the plate.
All right, Sarah Chayes.
And yeah, that's what's really important that we didn't do, that we actually put these warlords in place in Afghanistan who were part of this kleptocracy that Sarah Chayes is talking about in a broader sense. And I actually talk about this more in depth in my video, like I said, from 5 years ago, Who Lost Afghanistan? And I use clips of Sarah Chayes. I also noticed there's a Bill Maher clip in that video where I criticized Bill Maher for being too harsh on the culture of the people of Afghanistan, where Bill Maher says, oh, well, maybe they're not ready for democracy. They like play soccer with human heads or something like that. And that's not the problem at all. It's not that they don't want to be free. It's that we impose these warlords on them who even Hamid Karzai didn't choose, and Hamid Karzai wasn't the best choice, I don't think, either. And oh, by the way, I noticed about this whole issue of endless war, I've gotten a couple comments along the way that I've been reading First, here's one from NO8549, a Gore Vidal quote, "Perpetual war for perpetual peace." That is kind of the oxymoronic thing. Is that an oxymoron? I don't know. Does an oxymoron have to be shorter than perpetual war for perpetual peace? Whatever it is, it's oxymoronic if it's not an actual oxymoron, and I like that quote. And then also, there's this quote I saw, or a comment from Pezamange, I guess you would say. "Just think, without these endless wars, maybe America could afford free healthcare and education for all." Well, I did just see an article recently that the war on terror since 9/11 has cost over $1 trillion. It's 1 point something, I can't remember, but it was over $1 trillion in cost. So that's definitely true. And I mentioned that I was going to show some more clips on the end of the war in or combat. I keep saying the end of the war, but it's the end of combat operations in Afghanistan. And these next few clips are going to show that combat is still definitely going to be going on in Afghanistan, including the use of U.S. troops. But, oh, sorry, I think I just messed myself up by coughing. I got a little feedback today. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't hurt anybody's ears with that. But over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Martha Raddatz was hosting, and I've talked about Martha Raddatz before being a really good reporter with really good connections in the Pentagon and with the military. But one of the downsides of that is that she's so connected into the military point of view that she sometimes conveys a little bit of military propaganda, I think. But on the other hand, she knows them so well that she gets these inside interviews, and she does ask tough questions. But I think you'll see there's a real difference between the way the subject's treated in this Martha Raddatz piece compared to what I just showed you from NBC's Meet the Press. There's no talk about endless war, and there's really no talk about the non-military aspects of success, I guess, except on the part of this General John Campbell, who was interviewed by Martha Raddatz. He's taking over the U.S. forces in Afghanistan. First, here's the introduction from Martha Raddatz, which I think, if anything, in the few clips I'm going to show, this part is an example of the pro-military bias, I think. And then the next two clips are kind of more tougher questions, but here's kind of the pro-military bias from Martha Raddatz talking about what's going on in Afghanistan over in this clip.
This week marked what the U.S. calls the official end of combat operations in Afghanistan, a ceremony in Kabul with the general in charge of troops in Afghanistan, John Campbell, handing over the responsibility to the Afghans. But well over 10,000 U.S. troops will remain in Afghanistan under the command of General Campbell.
Few Americans know the country better than John Campbell. I have covered his deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And just on top of that hilltop is Pakistan.
He led combat teams early on in the wars. He was there during the so-called surge in Afghanistan when U.S. forces were at their peak with 100,000 troops in the country.
We've seen an uptick in the IEDs, in the indirect fire, complex attacks, but I think that's to be expected. I mean, the enemy knows that we're going to surge our forces in.
And now he is back with those 10,500 U.S. troops still on the ground, with memories still searing of the more than 2,000 who have died since 2001. I attended many of those memorial services with General Campbell over the years. He carries cards with each of the names of those lost under his command.
From the 101st, we've lost 27. We're at about 76 right now. I've lost 96 heroes.
For the general, the Army is family. His son is a soldier, too, with service in Afghanistan, just like his dad.
What do you tell your son when he says, I want to serve? You know, I'm very proud of him. But I'm proud of all these guys. Our country is just so very fortunate that we have great men and women that want to continue to do this.
And
so thank you for those of you in the comment section who said I needed to do a Marco Rubio. So although I did it, I can clear my throat a little better while you're watching the clips. And I think you can see in that clip that Martha Raddatz definitely gave a positive biography of General John Campbell. She obviously has a positive relationship with him, which is why she got to get this interview. And after giving that positive pro-military spin there, and I think she asked some important questions. First, in this first clip, you'll see she brought out pretty clearly that combat is still going to be occurring in Afghanistan, despite the fact that we just ended combat operations, as you can see over in this clip.
Campbell, I want to start with what those U.S. troops who are remaining in Afghanistan will be doing. I know it's training and assisting the Afghan forces, but won't they also be conducting raids?
Well, good to see you, Martha. Thanks. Yeah, we have two really missions here: train, advise, assist at the corps level and also at the ministry level. We'll do train, advise, assist with our special operating forces, and then we still have a U.S. counterterrorism mission. So our soldiers will continue at the special operating forces to do missions of work, train, advise, and assist with them.
So U.S. forces, especially those special operators, could see more combat.
Well, they're in a train, advise, assist role, and we always have the right for self-protection, but they'll be along with our Afghan partners to a certain point to continue to help to build the special operating capability, which is pretty good right now. We'll continue to build that here through 2015.
So, yeah, I think that Martha Raddatz made it pretty clear through her questioning of the general in charge of our forces in Afghanistan that despite the end of combat operations last week, there's still going to be U.S. forces involved in combat. And then Martha Raddatz also asked him a pretty tough question about whether the war in Afghanistan was actually worth it, using first an ABC poll that showed that a majority of Americans think that it wasn't worth it. And this is the one part where General John Campbell actually references civilian accomplishments as proof that things are working out in Afghanistan. And but I think Martha Raddatz does a good job of critically questioning him in this last clip on the endless war and the end of combat operations in Afghanistan that isn't really the end of combat, over in this clip.
15.
I want to bring your attention to an ABC poll released just this morning that says only 38% of Americans think the war was worth fighting. 56% say it was not.
Yeah, I'm in the camp that it was well worth fighting, continues to be very important that we have a presence here in Afghanistan. If you think about 9/11, the reason we came here, the front line of defense for Afghanistan, and there hasn't been another 9/11 since we've been here, I think that says quite a bit. There are people out here that continue to want to harm Americans, harm people in Europe, and by having a presence here, continue to apply pressure. I think that's good news, bad news for the terrorists that want to do that. So if you take a look at any metric in Afghanistan, whether it's roads, it's schools, number of females in the workforce, the life expectancy now, it's gone up incredibly in the last 13 years. So I think our soldiers, our airmen, sailors, Marines, I'd be very, very proud of what they've done the last 13 years.
General Campbell, there is evidence, and particularly around Kabul, there have been massive civilian casualties in Kabul. The Taliban has attacked government buildings, they've attacked residents, they've attacked Westerners. That seems to be a pretty bad sign.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word massive, Martha. I don't see massive casualties inside of Kabul. The high-profile attacks have gone up here the last 3 or 4 weeks. These are 1 or 2 people, suicide vests, attacking NGOs, attacking soft targets. So they have continued to try to do that. They're trying to show they're still relevant because they didn't hold terrain during the fighting season. Their leadership has fractured. So they are attacking soft targets here in Kabul. They've raised high-profile attacks, but I wouldn't say massive casualties. And again, the Afghan security forces continue to do pretty well. Finding a very small magnetic ID they put on a bus, finding one suicide bomber that comes inside a city of 3.3 million is very, very tough. But I think they continue to work at that very hard and will continue to be partnered up with them.
So I actually thought that both the ABC report there from Martha Raddatz interviewing General John Campbell, and then also back on NBC's Meet the Press, the Chuck Todd and Richard Engel reports on the endless war that continues after the end of combat operations in Afghanistan. I thought each in their own way they were informative, and they both had their strengths and weaknesses, but especially together, I thought that they left me feeling like I had thought about the problem again in a new way. And they also, like I said, reminded me of that old video I made back in 2009. But you can let me know what you think down in the comments section about the endless war and the end of combat operations in Afghanistan that haven't really ended combat. Now going sort of from the sublime to the ridiculous, one more comedy clip about things that were considered news, although this is soft news, I guess. Over on Fox and Friends Saturday, I saw this weird story that I thought showed this lack of self-awareness in a really strange way. They were talking about the social media and kids growing up today having all these friends on social media. They don't understand what friendship is, and they're talking about this on a show called Fox and Friends with a hashtag that they're trying to promote on social media, Better with Friends, but they're blaming the redefinition of the word friends on social media on a show called Fox and Friends, as I'll talk about a little more after I show you that clip here.
What's going on? I think we have to separate out. There's a difference between friendship and an acquaintance, and I think that because of social media, we sometimes confuse the two. So many kids today will say, for instance, Facebook, they'll say, well, I've got 300, 400 friends. Well, again, you have to sort out. I do believe that the kids today probably have fewer deep friendships, at least, when I compare to, myself growing up.
Now, with that guy, Scott Ventrella, who is some sort of like business guru or tells people how to do better at business, there's nothing totally wrong with what he was saying, but saying it on a show called Fox and Friends and blaming social media for this redefinition of friendship, that I don't know. I thought that was kind of strange. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I also want to show a couple quick clips on the split in the Republican Party between the conservatives and the establishment. First, on the side of the conservatives, a possible new conservative candidate for president in 2016, Mike Huckabee, over on Fox News, announced on his show Saturday night that he's quitting Fox News because he can't say for sure he's not running for president, although there may be another reason that's at the end of the clip I want to show you right here.
Now, I'm not going to make a decision about running until late in the spring of 2015, but the continued chatter has put Fox News into a position that just isn't fair to them, nor is it possible for me to openly determine political and financial support to justify a race. The honorable thing to do at this point is to end my tenure here at Fox. Now, as much as I have loved doing the show, I cannot bring myself to rule out another presidential run. Oh, be clear, I'm not making that announcement right now. And my timetable is still just what it was before, later this spring. But I agree with Fox that this is the right thing, and now is the right time. Harder than walking away from a generous paycheck from Fox is leaving some of the most incredible people I've ever worked with. As I say in my soon-to-be-released book, God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy, Roger Ailes, who's the chairman and CEO of the Fox News Channel, really is the smartest guy in the room. And it doesn't matter who else is in the room.
Now, speaking of the loudest voice in the room, that's about Roger Ailes, that book I have up there. And I don't know, he actually is a kind of smart guy based on what you read in that book, but not the most ethical, and not the person who I would really want to be calling my friend based on what you would read in that book anyway. But he mentioned his soon-to-be-released book, which may actually be the explanation more than a run for the presidency, although I wouldn't rule that out. But I think it's a lot easier to sell books if you're a potential presidential candidate than you are a Fox News host, although I guess being a Fox News host probably helps people sell books too. But I have seen polls that show that he's leading in Iowa because that's sort of a conservative Christian caucus state, the first caucus before the first primary in New Hampshire. So who knows, maybe Mike Huckabee actually will run for president. And then one more clip I want to show on the split in the Republican Party between the conservatives and the establishment. Huckabee would be against establishment candidates like Jeb Bush is the one who looks most likely to be the establishment candidate at this point. So here's Mitch McConnell first sort of disingenuously answering a question over, this is on CNN's State of the Union, the earlier broadcast before they were covering the funeral. They had Mitch McConnell on, who is now going to be the Republican leader of the Senate, and she asked him about his pledge to make Obama a one-term president, and he said that, well, Obama, I didn't do that, but then Obama didn't knock me off when I tried to run for re-election. I never even heard Obama say he was trying to do that, but then he gets into the split between the conservatives who don't want to work with Obama and then the establishment who does, and I'll talk about that a little more if you see it over here.
You famously, at the beginning of the Obama presidency, said that your political goal was to make him a one-term president. What's your goal now that he's just got 2 years left, but now you're going to be the majority leader and it's your legacy too?
Well, I think you could say both of us came up short. I had hoped to make him a one-term president, and he had hoped to defeat me last fall. I think what the American people are saying is they want us both to still be here. They want us to look for things to agree on and see if we can make some progress for the country.
And you feel like you can do that?
We're going to find out.
Expectations are pretty high. For the last 6 years, we've heard that things can't get done for conservatives because you only have one chamber. Now you have two. I know you still have a Democrat in the White House, but now you have two. So given that, how much of a balancing act do you have, pleasing conservatives, but also looking ahead to 2016 for Republicans and making the Republican Party a party that can elect nationwide a Republican president? Is that a tough balance?
Look, we need to do both. We need to both look for areas where we can make some progress for the country, and obviously to do that, we're going to need some Democratic senators, because we have 54, not 60, and we're going to need a president of the United States. There are other areas where we're not going to agree. What I hope Senate Republicans will present to the country is a conservative, right-of-center governing majority, serious people elected in serious times to try to get results.
When's the bourbon?
I don't know. It will be really interesting to see if the Senate can get anything done with the majority switch, but no one having a filibuster-proof majority. So now the Democrats can stop a lot of legislation from getting passed, and of course then there's the presidential veto, and there'll be several Republican senators running for president, it seems like, so that will give them their own agenda, and I don't know if it will result in anything getting done or just more gridlock. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I have two quick more clips before I finish the show. This is an interesting topic I've seen covered more in the news than you might think in most years. Influenza, the flu, has been covered, I've seen on the 24-hour cable news networks, and it was actually covered by Martha Raddatz over on ABC's This Week. I think maybe they feel a little guilty about all the time they spent on Ebola when really what they needed to do was dispel all the misinformation rather than getting people, all afraid. Like I showed you several clips a couple months back about the amping up of the fear of Ebola that didn't seem really justified. And so here's something that's actually killing people and might be killing even more people over the next several months. Flu season, I think, ends in April. And here's a summary by Martha Raddatz and then talking to Dr. Anthony Fauci over in this clip.
Now to those new warnings about the flu and word that it's reached epidemic proportions in the U.S. At least 22 states are reporting high activity of the virus. 9 states added to that list in just 1 week. And the CDC says that in a 7-day period last month, nearly 7% of deaths were possibly linked to the flu. Let's get more on this now from Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. It is an epidemic. But is it more so than other years? We see these alarming figures.
Well, you can't really tell at this stage, but certainly if you look at the trajectory, it's not going to be a good year. It's going to be a bad year. How bad it's going to be will depend on how it actually evolves, because you're still on the uptick. And if you sort of superimpose it upon other years, you can superimpose it upon a bad year. Last year was not a bad year, so it's already way ahead of last year, resembling more 2012, 2013 as opposed to 2013, 2014.
And the really interesting thing about this flu epidemic is the way that it mutated so that the vaccine they use isn't really effective, although you should still get vaccinated. I already got vaccinated, but it's just less effective, and that's explained also by Dr. Anthony Fauci, and then Martha Raddatz asked him to explain how it happened, and it's because there's this really long lead time in making the vaccine, and that's the final clip of the night over here.
Difficult to predict.
And one of the things that is clearly different about this year is the flu shots are not as effective, maybe just 60% effective.
No, 30-something percent. 67% unaffected.
Unaffective.
Right.
Unaffective. Even worse than I thought.
Right, yes.
So should people still get
absolutely.
a flu shot?
Martha, absolutely, because even though it isn't a good match to what's circulating, with the H3N2, remember there's an H1N1 and B, which matches well with the vaccine, even though that's not the predominant strain. Even though it isn't a good match for H3N2, getting vaccinated can give you cross protection. It could be the difference between getting very sick or just being mildly sick, the difference between being hospitalized or not. So we strongly recommend people getting vaccinated.
And tell me quickly how it happened that the flu shot is for the wrong virus.
Well, flus drift, and at a particular time when you have to make a decision about what to put into the vaccines, you usually do that around February. In February, a certain strain was the strain that was in the community, and it was felt that this was going to be the one. As you got into the end of March, April, when you already started making the vaccine, it started to drift around, and by the time you got to September, October, it drifted to the point where it was 67% a non-match. One thing we should remember is that when people get the flu, particularly people at high risk,
children, the elderly,
they should get an antiviral drug. They should see their physicians, because the anti-influenza drugs can be very, very helpful for people, particularly at high risk.
Very good.
So that's, I guess, important information for to have during a flu epidemic, and I guess that's more important for people to know about than really the whole Ebola scare, based at least on the threat to Americans, although some of the good work they did on Ebola was based on international efforts that maybe people scared over in the Western countries was an impetus to getting that work done. So maybe there was some real value to the fear of Ebola, but influenza is also something people should know about, especially if it's going to be a bad year. So I thought I would include that clip, and that's the end of the show. By the way, I got a message from YouTube that they're working on their fan funding thing, so I can't put a link over there or over there. They switched it around, and they said I should have something by the end of the quarter, so instead I have opened a Patreon account. Several people have asked me about that over the last few months, so there's a link down in the video description if you want to fund my future videos. I noticed there's been a significant drop in the revenue from the ads after the Christmas holiday. I guess that's when maybe they get less money from advertisers. I don't know, but hopefully I'll be able to continue doing this show for this foreseeable future and through the 2016 election. That's the kind of goal that I have from the Patreon account. If I can get the funding to keep me over minimum wage for the amount of time I put in, and then hopefully I can do more edited, produced videos as well, like the one on the Sam Harris book that I should actually have up sometime after Liberal Viewer Live, first Wednesday live, which I'm going to be doing this Wednesday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. Pacific. You can post questions on my Facebook or on my Twitter if you want me to answer questions on any topic. I do appreciate those of you who showed up live today. I think I peaked at around 95 viewers, and I looked at all the comments along the way. I picked out a couple to display while I was broadcasting, and that's why thanks to you for watching as a live broadcast and keeping me company while I show the clips I picked out. And I hope you appreciated the couple dozen clips that I thought were the best ones from the Sunday morning news shows, and the commentary that I tried to elucidate the clips that I got to watch a few times before I showed them to you. So anyway, I guess I'll be seeing you again next Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, and seeing you all around the internet.